After 9/11, there was an increased focus on sources of financial and material support relied on by terrorist organizations. Most terrorist organizations don't last very long. The ones that do are able to raise funds to sustain their operations. Financing also increases their range of influence and capacity to engage in violence. Cut off the funds, and they won't be able to carry on for very long, at least not in the same way. While some of these funds may go towards specific violent plots, most of it is used for ordinary operating expenses, including the basic costs of everyday living. Specifically, they use these funds to pay for security, support, intelligence, propaganda, materials, recruitment, training, housing, food, communications, bribery, weapons, travel, forging documents, personnel, and compensation to families whose relatives have been killed supporting their cause. They may also use funds to pay for local public improvement projects, such as roads and buildings, to curry favor among the people. Terrorists rely on many different sources for funding, including money from state government sponsors, such as Iran's support for Hezbollah, charitable organizations, wealthy donors, their own business ventures, restaurants, construction, transportation, banks, the manufacturing and sale of extremist literature, and of course, from crime. Terrorist organizations are involved in many different types of crimes: fraud, forgery, identity theft, human trafficking, extortion, burglary, robbery, kidnapping, and smuggling illicit drugs and other goods, including arms and counterfeit products. Drug trafficking, for example, has been a particularly important source of funding for terrorists, and many have argued it is their largest source of funds. This is also referred to as narco-terrorism. To profit from crimes such as drug and illicit goods smuggling, terrorists must take advantage of established networks for producing, distributing, and protecting these products. By doing so, they risk being caught and opening themselves to scrutiny that may jeopardize their ability to achieve their ideological goals. So why then do they engage in these crimes? Well, they do it for the same reasons as other criminals. There's a tremendous opportunity for financial gain, not only to fund their organizations, but often purely for profit as well. This points toward the contrast between terrorism and organized crime. Once considered entirely separate, it has become recognized that there is a continuum between pure terrorism and pure crime. Collaborations between terrorists and criminals occur when the two use their unique strengths for mutual benefit. Namely, terrorist organizations become involved in criminal activities, and criminal organizations engage in terrorist tactics. And there are numerous variations of these interactions on the continuum. Terrorists commit crimes to prepare for violent attacks, fund their operations, and for financial gain. Criminals may use terrorist tactics to maintain control over or to take focus away from their criminal enterprises, to gain political leverage, or to send messages to those who may challenge them. One type of organization may also morph into another over time. Some may start off as terrorists with an ideological focus, but eventually morph into a more criminal or profit-driven organization, largely abandoning their original ideological cause, but perhaps continuing to use it as window dressing to support their criminal enterprise. In such cases, their emphasis shifts toward money, power, and influence as opposed to advancing a political or religious extremist ideology or cause. This leads us to the central focus of the remainder of this video: financial and support crimes, which are crucial yet usually forgotten when talking about criminal activity among terrorists and extremists. The focus is typically placed on violent incidents, while ignoring financial crimes, material support, or preparatory crimes, crimes committed to fund an ideologically driven violent plot. But these crimes cause widespread financial harm. And on top of this, there is further concern about escalation into violence, where individuals start by engaging in ideologically motivated financial crimes, but later engage in more violent activity as their commitment to an extremist cause solidifies. The information presented in the remainder of this video comes directly from my research on extremists indicted in the US between 1990 and 2013. First, we'll look at Al-Qaeda and affiliated movements, or AQAM, which includes any organizations or individuals sharing Al-Qaeda's global jihadist ideology. AQAP, Al-Shabaab, ISIL, just to name a few. Only about half of the perpetrators were linked directly to an identifiable terrorist organization. Others merely sympathized with their ideological goals and wanted to support or join them. Then there were non-extremist collaborators who engaged in these schemes for non-ideological reasons, such as financial gain or aiding a family member. The most prominent crimes by far were the 93 material support schemes committed by 192 perpetrators designed to aid terrorist activities, groups, or other ideologically motivated activity. 49% involved general assistance, information, training, or recruitment. 17% involved the provision of supplies, equipment, or weapons. And 60% involved either travel or attempted travel overseas to join an AQAM organization or to support the cause generally. Now, it's important to note that dozens more individuals have been indicted for material support since these data were originally collected, generally for attempts to join ISIL. Over half of the remaining AQAM financial schemes involved monetary support, also called money dirtying, sometimes referred to as reverse money laundering. This is when money from legitimate sources is used for illicit purposes, such as funding terrorist operations. They need a way to conceal the money while it's being transferred, and this is where various money dirtying techniques comes into play, such as informal value transfer systems, where money is not actually physically moved or wired, but the amount to be transferred between two parties is done through intermediaries who guarantee and provide the agreed upon value. And of course, there is money laundering, which has always been popular as profit-driven criminals need a way to clean their illicit gains by converting it into assets that cannot be traced back to the underlying criminal activity that generated them. The goal is to make illegally obtained funds appear to have been acquired legally. There are numerous money laundering techniques, including funneling dirty money through a currency exchange bureau, a legitimate business or front company, falsifying loans or invoices for exports or imports or other purchases, and overstating the value of real estate or other properties. Money laundering has been used by both jihadists and far-right extremists to launder dirty money, such as profits from illicit drug trafficking. Now let's turn to far-right extremists. Their financial crimes overall are very different from those of jihadists. Over 600 financial crime schemes were committed by over 1,300 perpetrators. 40% of them were sovereign citizens, and another 23% were tax protesters, with a smaller number of militia and patriot group members and white supremacists. 1 in 5 were non-extremist collaborators who engaged in these schemes for financial gain or profit, which is an important point. These financial schemes had different motivations driving them. Most were ideologically driven, but others were profit-driven, or a mix of both. Non-extremists, of course, were motivated by profit, but so were many extremists. You saw the graph on the right in the first video in this module on organizational structures. It represents financial crime schemes involving far-right extremists. There's a lot going on there, but in the most basic sense, red represents ideological motivation, blue represents profit. So you see a lot of profit motivation here. This is most prominent in schemes involving a large number of people. The more people who get involved, the more likely there will be people who aren't true believers, but are just doing it for the money. By far, though, the most prominent schemes were ideologically motivated tax avoidance carried out as a form of anti-government protest. Most of these tax avoidance schemes involve various frivolous arguments about tax laws and the U.S. Constitution, all of which speak to the perpetrator's belief that they are not morally or legally obligated to pay taxes, arguing that taxes and other laws are unconstitutional, illegal, invalid, or just voluntary. The fact that they were predominantly sovereign citizens is not particularly surprising. After all, if you think you are your own sovereign entity outside the law, why would you follow tax laws? These tax avoidance schemes utilize a wide array of techniques, some of which include stopping tax withholdings, hiding income or funneling it through shell companies, refusing to file tax documents, or submitting false tax documents, such as by writing in 0 for all the fields. Many schemes also involve the sale and purchase of anti-tax packages, where those looking to avoid taxes were charged extravagant fees and provided fake documentation, instructions on how to file false tax documents, and in some cases, fake financial instruments to satisfy existing debt. Cases such as these are closely tied with banking fraud, typically check or loan fraud to obtain funds, pay off debts, or just to disrupt the financial system. Check fraud typically consists of fictitious, often self-manufactured checks, money orders, or other similar financial instruments, such as fake comptroller's warrants used by the freeman. Loan fraud, including mortgage and real estate fraud, is when false information is used to obtain a bank loan, which they then refuse to repay. Non-existent persons or shell entities are also used to hide where the loan money ended up, so it is harder to trace and recover. One of these schemes is the popular redemption or straw man scheme, which essentially claims that the U.S. Treasury has created secret bank accounts for each U.S. citizen called a straw man that can be utilized by citizens to pay taxes and other debts using fake financial instruments, often fictitious U.S. Treasury checks known as a sight draft or bill of exchange. There are also investment fraud schemes. Some were Ponzi schemes, promising excessive returns for investments by using the money to pay the originators of the scheme and its earliest investors, or pyramid schemes where there is first buy-in to a fake product, such as a tax avoidance or a debt elimination package, where there is then an incentive for making money by getting more people to join in selling the packages. Of course, the fees to join and stay involved primarily funnel their way up to the top of the pyramid. Others revolved around accessing non-existent secret government accounts, similar to the redemption scheme. Another example was a scheme that operated nationwide in the mid-1990s, which claimed a secret U.S. Supreme Court ruling had declared the Federal Reserve bankrupt and required them to pay $20 million to every U.S. citizen. Those who wanted their money had to file a claim through the perpetrators, who were administrating the settlement, and of course, invest a $300 filing fee. Also popular among far-right extremists are the filing of false liens and other documents. A lien is a hold on a property to secure the interest of a third party and is frequently used by banks and creditors to ensure the repayment of loans. If you get a bank loan on a car or house, the bank files a lien on it until the loan is paid off. If you fail to pay back the loan, the bank can seize the property. Virtually anyone can file a lien with the county clerk with the proper paperwork. Far-right extremists have taken advantage of this by filing false liens against government officials and others who have opposed them by claiming an interest in their personal property. Typically, these fake liens are abnormally excessive, in the millions or even billions of dollars, and are often filed in retaliation or to intimidate those who they feel have wronged them in some way, such as criminal justice officials lawfully carrying out their official duties. And of course, AQAM and far-right extremists have committed numerous other types of financial crimes as well, such as identity theft, insurance fraud, embezzlement, counterfeiting of both currency and consumer products, credit card fraud, and cybercrime. So, to sum up, far-right extremists are primarily involved in tax avoidance, but also bank and investment fraud and false liens, while AQAM extremists are primarily involved in material and monetary support. You may be asking, what about far-left extremists? Well, no far-left financial crime schemes were identified. Most far-left extremist crimes of the last 3 decades have been committed by ELF and ALF extremists who have primarily engaged in bombings and arsons. The uniqueness among the different types of crimes committed by extremists subscribing to different ideologies is interesting in and of itself, and probably speaks mostly to the inherent differences in the nature of the ideologies themselves. But it's an open question that still needs to be examined further. And there is another important question left to address. What about material and monetary support schemes for far left and far right extremists? Well, there aren't really any. So why is this? Because none of the activities we reviewed earlier that fell under AQAM material and monetary support are applicable to far-right and far-left extremists. They aren't illegal. As mentioned last week, unlike international terrorism, there is no comparable criminal statute for domestic terrorism. It is illegal to try to join, give money, recruit, or provide training for Al-Qaeda, ISIL, or any other organization designated as a foreign terrorist organization, or FTO, by the U.S. State Department. It is not illegal to do the same thing for the KKK, the National Socialist Movement, the Earth Liberation Front, Antifa, or any other U.S.-based extremist organizations or movements. As a result, comparisons between AQAM and other extremists in this way is rather skewed. They are certainly not apples to apples, as they are not held criminally liable for the same types of activities. Now, there is a debate as to whether material support crimes don't exist for domestic terrorism or whether prosecutors have not tried to apply a different provision of the same statute due to practical limitations to the way it is written. But nevertheless, the end result is the same. This points to an important question. Should existing terrorism laws be altered to account for this discrepancy, and if so, how? This is a question we'll return to later. And that's all for this video. Beginning next week, we'll be focusing on post-9/11 anti-terrorism and homeland security strategies. Have a good one.